That's how we're keeping things for the rest of this week. Always a bit more cloud across this northwest corner with some rain at times, particularly the north and west of Scotland. By far the bulk of the dry, sunny weather will be across England and Wales. There may be the odd isolated shower here and there, but most places will stay dry. In fact, a pretty good looking week coming up all in all. Thanks to high pressure, which has been building in, killing off the showers, pushing away the weather fronts. It's left a legacy of cloud, though, and that's what we're going to see again across parts of the north of the UK, and also some sea fog, some mist and murk here and there across the North Sea coast in towards the Irish Sea as well, but generally dry for most with a few clear spells, temperatures 6 to 10 Celsius. High pressure then dominates the scenes, gets a bit stronger across the country, so I think we'll see fewer showers for England and Wales, but these weather fronts will bring thicker cloud, more of a breeze, outbreaks of rain to the northwest of the country. Most places starting dry, a bit of mist and murk to start off with, plenty of sunshine, England and Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, Northern Ireland, then we'll start to see splashes of rain with increasing breeze across the north and west of Scotland into the afternoon. So 13, 14 degrees here, up to 20 for southern Scotland, 21 or 22 in the warmest spots in England and Wales. The winds generally light coming in from the south. Wednesday night, most places dry again with clear spells, variable cloud. Stays quite cloudy, breezy with outbreaks of rain across the northern half of Scotland through the night. And temperatures again 6 to around 10 degrees. So for Thursday then, I think we'll see more sunshine around across England and Wales. Bit of a cloudy start, then the sunshine really gets going, and I don't think there'll be any issues with showers whatsoever. Should stay completely dry. Bit more cloud for northern Scotland, the odd shower here, but southern Scotland, Northern Ireland doing pretty well. Temperatures 19 or 20 degrees here, 22 or 23 the warmest spots across England and Wales. High pressure continues to bring fine weather on Friday and into the weekend as well, but it starts to retreat towards the continent and allows low pressure to take over initially from the west as we head through the latter part of Sunday. So it could be quite warm Friday and certainly into the weekend across the south of the country. By the end of Sunday, we'll start to see a few showers, I think, pushing into western areas. Take care.
I'm not sure I've actually said this before. I came up there and I cried. Wow.
A symbol of friendship to some, panda diplomacy to others.
That world has eaten up and spit out a lot of young and attractive guys.
There's always more to the story with our podcasts. Listen on BBC Sounds.
I want Hip Life to be that good story that lifted black folks in Africa and all over the world, gave young people a voice.
It's part of being an actor, because I always say as an actor, you can't be a control freak. You have to be willing to give up control.
So I like this idea of a live piece of art. And I just like this idea of making invisible visible through art.
Sometimes you can have really serious portraits, but you've got such a great laugh. I feel like I want to capture some of the candid nature of your personality.
Opera House can and must be many things. It shouldn't cater just to one audience, and it shouldn't be focused on just one corner of the repertoire. It must do everything and be open to the interests of many different people.
Inspiring arts and culture. Watch now on iPlayer.
What does it take to become a top opera star like tenor Jonas Kaufmann, Welsh bass baritone Sabrina Terrell, and Greek-American soprano Maria Callas? I'm on a mission to find out how opera is trying to attract new audiences and reinvent itself.
I think music has the power to change the world.
Take me to the opera. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
I see myself in the girls that we're fighting for.
Climate change is real, and we must act now.
Argument is less powerful than emotion, and negative emotion is more powerful than positive emotion.
More than anything else, when we have more feminist storytellers, things will change.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraiser, and this is The Context.
They have no case. Every single legal scholar that I see, I mean, maybe there's somebody out there, some whack job, but for virtually everyone that I've seen, I said there's absolutely no case. It's a case that shouldn't have been brought.
The woman who Donald Trump paid $130,000 to keep quiet has been speaking out in great detail in court.
She says that she decided to do that not because of the money, but she thought it was a win-win. She could get paid and also secure the safety of her family with just getting the story out.
Yes, the people call Stormy Daniels, the adult film star who slept with Donald Trump and was paid for her silence. She takes the stand in Manhattan. It has been a salacious day in court. We will get the latest from our correspondent in New York. Israel launches another operation in Rafah. Not the real thing, it says, but the main crossing is closed. We'll hear from the UN's point man in Rafah, who is trying to keep the aid operation afloat. And a plot to assassinate President Zelensky. Foiled, but what does it tell us about Russia's intent and the enemies within? Very good evening. Stormy Daniels was paid $130,000 for her silence, but that's not what this case is about. It's not the act of paying the adult film star that is under legal scrutiny here. The prosecution allege it is the manner in which she was paid and how it was ultimately covered up. Daniels was paid by Donald Trump just before the 2016 election. The defence say to protect his family. But the prosecution alleged she was paid through his advisor, Michael Cohen, who was later reimbursed for legal services by the Trump Organization. An attempt to falsify business records in that way is typically classified as a misdemeanor in New York, but the prosecution argue that because it was paid right before the 2016 election, that then constituted a campaign finance crime, a felony for which Michael Cohen pleaded guilty in 2018. That is what Stormy Daniels' testimony is central to this case for. What was she paid for? Why was it so urgent? The former president says there's nothing to see. Let's speak then to Ned of Torfik, our North America correspondent, who is in New York for us. There have been questions in recent days, Ned, about whether this is actually cutting through. I imagine the evidence we've heard today will be headlines everywhere tonight.
Absolutely, Christian. I mean, Stormy Daniels was a hotly anticipated witness, if not the most highly anticipated one. She, of course, is at the center of all of this, and her account is extremely salacious. So just in terms of the headlines that will come out of this and how it might affect the presidential election is certainly at the top of minds, no doubt Donald Trump's, who focuses intently on how he is portrayed in the media. But look, her testimony really verged on explicit details that even the judge said went too far. She talked about that sexual encounter that Donald Trump denies back in 2006 at Lake Tahoe, testifying that Donald Trump greeted her in silk pajamas, that she swatted him on his butt with a rolled-up magazine, and that he posed on the bed before they had sex while she stared at the ceiling. The defense actually called for a mistrial, saying her testimony was unduly prejudicial. But the judge said a mistrial wasn't warranted, though he agreed, Christian, that some of the things were better left unsaid.
Did she go into the motivation she had to take the payment?
No surprise to the prosecution.
Yeah, and I think this is where the testimony really becomes more relevant to the key parts of this case. You know, Stormy Daniels said that she really didn't tell many people about the alleged sexual encounter because she was ashamed. And that in 2011, she did try to sell her story, but she said she was actually threatened by someone in Trump's orbit, who she later came to find out was Michael Cohen, his fixer, saying to essentially leave the story alone and leave Donald Trump alone. That's what she testified. But she says when Donald Trump then began his run for office, she decided that she wanted to get the story out for her safety and also to be paid. And she said that was her motivation before ultimately deciding to agree to stay silent in exchange for that $130,000 payment.
Yeah, and that really comes to the point that I was just setting out, Neda, is why she was paid and the timing of the payment. Did she make the connection between the timing and the election?
She absolutely did, Christian. You know, she said that Donald Trump previously had never raised concerns about her keeping quiet about the affair. And as far back as 2011, again, there was no effort to kind of buy her silence. She said, in fact, that she knew it was down to the election because Michael Cohen kept delaying paying her. And she knew if she didn't get paid before the election, she never would. So she is yet another corroborating witness for the prosecution that this was all done to prevent embarrassing information from getting out to influence Donald Trump.
Neda Torfi in New York, thank you very much. The intelligence service in Ukraine have uncovered a Russian plot to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky. Two colonels from the government's protection unit suspected of passing on secret information to the Russian FSB have been arrested. The BBC has obtained this footage from the Ukrainians, which claims to show the two agents admitting to the plot. It's claimed they bought drones, explosives and mines to Kyiv from other Ukrainian regions to use in an attack. The plan was to follow Mr. Zelensky, abduct him and then murder him. They were reportedly recruited before the Russian invasion 2 years ago. The assassination, according to the statement, was to be timed for President Putin's inauguration, which took place today in Moscow. Here's what the spokesman of Ukraine's security services had to say about it.
The network, whose activities were overseen by the FSB from abroad, included two Ukrainian State Security Administration colonels who leaked secret information to the Russian Federation. The enemy was actively developing plans to eliminate President Volodymyr Zelensky. One of the most important tasks of the FSB agent network was to find executors among the military close to the president who could take the head of state hostage and later kill him.
Matthew Schmidt is an Associate Professor of National Security and Political Science at the University of New Haven. Thank you for being with us. It sort of puts the focus on the security circle around President Zelensky. How well is he protected?
Thanks for having me. He's obviously very well protected, and we know that it's not just his security service, but it's the CIA, British intelligence, and probably the Poles are out looking out for him too outside of Ukraine.
It sparked a conversation in our office today about what would happen if he was killed. Would it harden resolve in the West? Would it lead to a collapse in Ukraine? Is there someone with the same charisma as President Zelensky that could take the mantle?
Yeah, I think the Russians grossly miscalculate if they think that assassinating Zelensky will better their position in the war. I think it would absolutely embolden Western support. It might be even the kind of event that would draw in Western troops, and it would certainly increase the resolve of the Ukrainian people. This was a ham-handed plot when you look at it again. So I don't know what the Russians are thinking.
Well, that's the interesting point here, isn't it? That we sort of have this fear and respect in some instances for Russian intelligence and what they're capable of, but again, this looks a little bit like the military and just how inadequate some of it is.
Yeah, this is another instance where the West had a perception that the competency of the Russian military was much greater than it turns out it is. And it's the same with their intelligence services. Although we've had evidence of this for years. There were the plots in the UK. There were the failed plots against Alexei Navalny. So this just continues on in that line. And I thought one of the interesting things here is that this was a hit for hire. This was about money. It wasn't about ideology. And that speaks well of the people around Zelensky, that you don't have people who are doing this for Putin. They're doing it for cash. They do it for anybody. And those people tend to get caught.
It was also long distance. I mean, the idea was that they would use a drone and a missile, which again suggests that the FSB aren't that close to President Zelensky.
Yeah, they can't seem to find somebody close enough. And remember, these are two colonels in the protective units who still can't get close enough. So they have to come up with this plan to bring in drones and a missile, like you said, and there's lots of points of failure here, right? Obviously they were caught, but suppose they hadn't been, there's every reason to believe that those drones or that missile would be shot down by air defense. So this just didn't seem like a very professional operation.
Just a final thought. Does it, again though, put the spotlight on a corruption problem within the Ukrainian military?
I think this is a latent corruption problem. You've seen a lot of firings going on in the last year to try to root these things out. And remember, these two accused colonels are colonels that came in, early on, I think before 2014. So they've had long careers back when the military was frankly a lot more corrupt. So I'm not sure that it's a present day problem as much as there are some people left in the system who would do things like this for hire.
Matthew Schmidt, good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the programme.
Thanks, Christian.
Well, we're told the situation in Ukraine was one of the subjects that Xi Jinping raised today in his meetings with the French President Emmanuel Macron. The Chinese leader was on the second day of a state visit to France and was taken this morning to a spa town in the Pyrenean Mountains. In metaphorical terms, that is where soft diplomacy meets here in Europe, that the Chinese are dumping their overproduction and that state subsidies are undercutting European industry. Here in Britain, there are fresh concerns about Chinese spying, with new information today that Chinese elements had hacked the payroll of the Ministry of Defence. China said the claims were absurd. Let's bring in someone who's been on the programme before, senior Europe correspondent at the South China Morning Post, Finbar Birmingham. Finbar, good to have you with us. Let's start with the focus on Ukraine. There was some reporting, some rumour today that President Xi has a sort of embryonic plan for some peace talks with regards to Ukraine, which is interesting because, as we were discussing last night, it feels as if the Europeans have gone past that point.
Yes, Christian, I would say you're probably right. I mean, I think I saw the same rumours that you did on social media. It hasn't been substantiated, and frankly, I'd be quite surprised looking at the rhetoric that came out of this trip. They do seem as far apart as ever. Both sides say they want to bring peace to Ukraine, but they're very different. They have very different point of views in how they would do that. Xi Jinping, he reiterated his point in Paris that the legitimate security concerns of all parties in the conflict would have to be respected. And that's anathema both to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, who see Russia as the aggressor in this war. They don't see the security concerns of the Russians as being legitimate. So as I don't have any intel on that specific point, it seems to jar with the reality of what we've seen in the diplomacy leading up to this. I mean, Chinese diplomats have been traveling to Europe for months now, and they've been pushing for example, in order to attend peace talks in Switzerland, they told EU officials that they wanted the West to stop shipping weapons to Ukraine. That's not going to happen. I mean, we see an influx of an increase in that. So I would hasten to say that I might be wrong, but those rumours seem quite far-fetched.
But that said, President Macron has welcomed today a Chinese commitment, in inverted commas, to abstain from selling weapons to Russia and to closely control the export of dual-usage equipment. I mean, there's a big difference between a commitment and actually following through on it. But I just wonder if that does reflect a cooling of the relationship between Beijing and Moscow, which has also been discussed.
I don't think so. Vladimir Putin's going to China next week. I don't necessarily see that much of a cooling in the relationship. Macron did say that he had a commitment from Xi Jinping, but I think he also said that last year when he went to Beijing in April. The proof will be in the pudding, particularly on the dual-use goods. The Europeans notice a dramatic increase in the intensity in which China is shipping things like circuit boards and microchips and surveillance equipment and satellite imagery, these sorts of dual-use items that they say are rocking up on the battlefield in Ukraine and killing Ukrainians. So the proof will be in the pudding. I mean, one thing we did see come out of this meeting was that the Chinese supported the French push to have an Olympic truce, which would be a ceasefire in all global conflicts during the Paris Games in July and August, which sounds great, of course. But again, I don't think the Russians or, many parties at conflict would pay heed to the timing of the Olympics in terms of when they're going to have a ceasefire.
Trade was a big part of the discussion today. We know that the European Commission, is wrapping up its anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric cars. But what the Chinese are very good at is divide and rule. I don't think the Germans are particularly keen on this investigation because, of course, they have a very close relationship with the Chinese when it comes to cars. Not so the French.
It's true. The Germans and the French are quite far apart on how they see this. The French were they were the ones who sponsored the Commission's investigation on an unofficial basis. What we saw this week was the French double game in motion. They want to see anti-subsidy duties put on the import of Chinese cars coming to Europe, but they also want the Chinese to set up electric vehicle factories in France. This is quite clear. They said this on the record. This is what they want. The Germans don't like any of this. So we do see that Europe's two major powers are sort of pulling in opposite directions, whereas the French really love the tougher trade stance that Brussels has taken. The French diplomats here in Brussels, they joke that Brussels itself is becoming more French, whereas it's anathema to the Germans who, as you say, are far more exposed to the Chinese economy.
There's a couple of other stories I want to touch on outside of France today. Of course, the story here in the UK that China is thought to be behind a hack of the UK Ministry of Defence's payroll, which is embarrassing for the MOD, but of great concern, not just to the UK. There are other European governments who have these concerns as well.
Yeah, it's part of a trend, I would say. I mean, in the last month, we've seen a real ratcheting up in these cases of alleged espionage on the part of the Chinese intelligence services. Just this morning in Brussels, in fact, the far right, the German far right, the AfD's lead candidate in the European elections, he's an MP called Maximilian Krah. His office in the European Parliament was raided by German and Belgian police investigating his assistant for spying for China. We saw 4 German nationals, including Krah's assistant, arrested last month for the same charges. And of course, you recall that I'm sure you've covered on the show, the MPs in the UK who've had their phones hacked by China. We saw the head of the Belgian Foreign Affairs Committee have the same problem. The former Belgian Prime Minister, Guy Verhofstadt, says his phone was hacked by Chinese intelligence services. So there's a big uptick in this. I don't know what the Western authorities are going to do about it because it seems to be a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and they're being repeatedly exposed by it. One last thought. TikTok, as we expected, have announced that they are going to challenge a US law that could force a nationwide ban on the app. Not entirely surprising. They said they would sue, and presumably with the backing of the Chinese state. Well, the backing of the Chinese state, I don't know if that would help them very much. I mean, it's often quite humorous to me to see, for instance, Chinese diplomats and Chinese state journalists going on Twitter to really voice support for TikTok when the company itself is trying to convince everybody that it's got no connections to the Chinese state. It's no surprise that they're going to challenge this. As you said, in Europe, actually, we had a story last week where President von der Leyen of the Commission said that she didn't rule out banning TikTok here. I think that's a long, long way away. But yeah, I mean, it seems to be on to a bit of a hiding to nothing in the United States, like many Chinese companies are. It's a tough environment for them. Finbar Birmingham, always good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Christian.
Around the world and here in the UK, this is BBC News. For our UK viewers who are still with us, let's have a look at some of the headlines here today. John Swinney will become Scotland's 7th First Minister after being nominated by Parliament. The SNP leader succeeds Hamza Yousaf, who resigned from office earlier today. His appointment will be rubber-stamped by the King before he is officially sworn in at the Court of Session on Wednesday. There have been no trains on some of the busiest commuter routes in the country today due to strikes by ASLEF train drivers. Disruption is expected to continue throughout the week. Tomorrow it's a different set of operators which will be affected, among them Avanti West Coast and Great Western. And it's been revealed that Prince Harry will not meet the King during his visit to the UK this week. A spokesman for the Duke of Sussex said a meeting between father and son wasn't possible because of the King's busy schedule. Harry is in London to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games, which he set up, of course, to rehabilitate wounded or sick service personnel. You're watching BBC News. The White House said this afternoon it is still hopeful Israel and Hamas can close the remaining gaps on a ceasefire agreement the Palestinians have accepted, but Israel has rejected. So why did the Israelis appear blindsided by a negotiation the CIA Director Bill Burns was so involved in? Sources say Bill Burns has returned to Cairo for talks today. Those close to the talks say the US invited the Israelis to Cairo over the weekend, but they had declined to send a team. One Israeli official told Axios this morning that was a mistake that led to Israel having less visibility on the final stages of the talks. Well, they have begun again today in Cairo, and the Israelis have now sent a mid-level delegation. Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organisation by the UK and other Western governments, say the ball is now in Israel's court.
We emphasise that the ball is now in Netanyahu and the extremist pillars of his government's court. Their behaviour after Hamas's approval is an indication that he is insisting on disrupting the efforts of mediators, including the US administration. And also, he doesn't care about the lives of his hostages, who face death every day.
Without an agreement, the fighting continues and things are escalating inside Rafah. The Americans say they've been assured this is a limited operation designed to cut Hamas's ability to rearm, but the Israelis have cut off the main crossing point in Rafah, which severely limits the aid operation. Before we came on air, I spoke to Sam Rose, UNRWA's Director of Planning. He is in Rafah and trying to keep the operation going.
A couple of days ago, we woke up to the news that Israel had enforced an evacuation order for a kind of a 3-mile area or so in the eastern side of Rafah. They estimate that about 100,000 people live in that area, and the evacuation order told people that they had to move, so it's tantamount to forced displacement, which is illegal under international law, and it's a similar pattern to what we've seen in other parts of Gaza, starting in Gaza City on, I believe, the 13th of October. So 2 days ago, that evacuation order was issued. We heard almost, I guess it was almost this time last night, about 24 hours ago, that Hamas had announced it had accepted the ceasefire agreement. So there was a sense of relief and a sense of respite, and there were even celebrations in the street. I mean, they turned out to be premature because the news following that was that the deal had been rejected by Israel, and we woke up this morning to the sound of heavy bombardments. A lot of people from within inside that evacuation or area have left, but a lot of people outside that area have left as well. I mean, Rafah is home to about 1.5 million people. 5 out of 6 of those people are displaced. So most people here are living in tents, and some of those people living in tents outside the evacuation area or the area that was subject to an evacuation order have just decided to move now. So a lot of movement on the streets, a lot of fear, quite a lot of panic and severe anxiety amongst an already exhausted population.
I've worked in Rafah, so I do know that either side of the crossing, which has now been closed, there's this sort of corridor which tanks can move up and down. Is that the situation now, that effectively the Israelis have control close to the wall, close to the Egyptian border, such that, that aid can't get in at all now?
Yeah, I mean, since October and for many years, actually, the only entry point for aid and commercial supplies to Gaza has been in Rafah, the Kerem Shalom border crossing, which you'll know is in the southeastern corner of Rafah. That closed on Sunday following a Palestinian attack on an Israeli military point. But yeah, I mean, we woke up this morning to the news that Israel had taken control of the Palestinian side of the crossing. You may have seen the video clips, the video footage taken by IDF soldiers fairly gratuitously mowing, driving tanks over lawns and vandalizing the crossing point. But more fundamentally, from a kind of humanitarian perspective, it means that crossing point is closed.
We are going to speak tonight to someone from the Israeli Knesset, and I know from a briefing conversation with her that she's concerned UNRWA is part of the problem in Gaza. It's a criticism we've heard before from the Israeli government. I wonder what you make of that officially.
I mean, we've heard this a lot. UNRWA is not part of the problem. UNRWA is the largest aid entity operation on the ground in Gaza. We're the ones who are essentially keeping people alive. We're providing flour, we're providing food to almost 1.9 million people, 85–90% of the population. We're providing 25,000 healthcare consultations for people, refugees and non-refugees inside Gaza. Historically, Palestinian refugees have enjoyed some of the highest rates of literacy, the best health outcomes in this part of the region. UNRWA is absolutely not part of the problem. UNRWA is what's keeping Gaza going, sadly, right now. And we have a collective responsibility, and Israel has a responsibility as per the findings of the International Court of Justice.
Sam Rose there from UNRWA, and as I say, we will speak to a member of the Israeli Knesset tonight to get some answers on that ceasefire and why it's currently stalled and how long this operation in Rafah will last. Do stay with us.
Hello there. Despite some cloud across northern areas, especially across Scotland, much of the country had a pretty decent day today with a good deal of sunshine around. It felt quite warm through the afternoon. That's how we're keeping things for the rest of this week. Always a bit more cloud across this northwest corner with some rain at times, particularly the north and west of Scotland. By far the bulk of the dry, sunny weather will be across England and Wales. There may be the odd isolated shower here and there, but most places will stay dry. In fact, a pretty good looking week coming up all in all, thanks to high pressure, which has been building in, killing off the showers, pushing away the weather fronts. It's left a legacy of cloud, though, and that's what we're going to see again across parts of the north of the UK, and also some sea fog, some mist and murk here and there across the North Sea coast in towards the Irish Sea as well, but generally dry for most with a few clear spells. Temperatures 6 to 10 Celsius. High pressure then dominates the scene, gets a bit stronger across the country, so I think we'll see fewer showers for England and Wales, but these weather fronts will bring thicker cloud, more of a breeze, outbreaks of rain to the northwest of the country. Most places starting dry, a bit of mist and murk to start off with, plenty of sunshine, England and Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, Northern Ireland, then we'll start to see splashes of rain with increasing breeze across the north and west of Scotland into the afternoon. So 13, 14 degrees here, up to 20 for southern Scotland, 21 or 22 in the warmest spots in England and Wales. The winds generally light coming in from the south. Wednesday night, most places dry again with clear spells, variable cloud. Stays quite cloudy, breezy with outbreaks of rain across the northern half of Scotland through the night. And temperatures again 6 to around 10 degrees. So for Thursday then, I think we'll see more sunshine around across England and Wales. Bit of a cloudy start, then the sunshine really gets going, and I don't think there'll be any issues with showers whatsoever. Should stay completely dry. Bit more cloud for northern Scotland, the odd shower here, but southern Scotland, Northern Ireland doing pretty well. Temperatures 19 or 20 degrees here, 22 or 23 the warmest spots across England and Wales. High pressure continues to bring fine weather on Friday and into the weekend as well, but it starts to retreat towards the continent and allows low pressure to take over initially from the west as we head through the latter part of Sunday. So it could be quite warm Friday and certainly into the weekend across the south of the country. By the end of Sunday, we'll start to see a few showers, I think, pushing into western areas. Take care.
Some of the UK's biggest crime stories.
Brianna wanted to be famous in a really sad way. She is now.
Something's happened. I say, where's my brother? There's just silence.
As told by those who investigated them.
Have you got anything on that's going to hurt me or you?
I've seen the footage. It always gets me here.
And the effect on their loved ones.
He was taken before his time. He didn't deserve to go like this.
The big cases. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
For now, it's a defensive position and can only be activated if the militia attack.
They are proud of their democracy, but they also fear it's now under threat from China like never before.
Every time the government drops tear gas, people disperse, but the farmers come back.
When you're this close to the river, which is a front line, you are always watched, so you have to move quickly.
There when the story breaks. BBC News. Follow on the app.
The world of film is changing. The Talking Movies team brings you up to date.
Is from other cultures.
Interviewing top filmmakers and stars.
I didn't think I'd ever seen anything like that on screen.
From blockbusters to art house cinema, we'll spotlight the brilliant and unique voices bringing their stories to the big screen.
Talking Movies. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
You're watching The Context. Now it's time for Europe Votes 2024. Welcome to the programme. We are now just a month away. From June 6th to June 9th, millions of people will be voting to elect the next European Parliament. 720 politicians from 27 countries, in what many consider to be a pivotal moment for the future of the European Union. And if you've been following this series, then you will know that for several weeks now we've been moving from country to country as we try to get a better idea of what people will be voting on. We've been to the Netherlands, to Spain, to France, and tonight we are in Italy, the EU's third biggest economy and the European frontier when it comes to migration across the Mediterranean. In 2023, 157,000 refugees and migrants reached Italy via sea, marking the fourth consecutive year of increasing arrivals, a 50% rise on the previous year and the third highest year for sea arrivals since 1998. The right-wing government of Giorgia Meloni was elected to deal with this problem. She's been leading the reform of asylum rules in Brussels and more recently has signed a deal with a third country, Albania, to build 2 new detention centres where they will process Italy's backlog. Now, not so long ago, Meloni's post-fascist government would have been snubbed in Europe, perhaps seen as an outlier. But there's been a drastic realignment, and in every country we have thus far visited, it is the hard right that lead the polls. There are other systemic issues. Its public finances are still in a precarious condition and Italy needs more workers for its various industries. But as Mark Lowen has been discovering, that drive to grow the workforce could be held back because of the growing hard right influence.
The big beasts of Italian politics are lining up for their European battle. And at Circe Farm, south of Rome, which rears 1,800 buffaloes, the question is whether change is afloat. It's a very Italian family business, churning out exceptional mozzarella and ricotta.
Here, the average...
The grandson of the founder says the problems are many, from European farmers being undercut by non-EU countries to another long-standing Italian issue.
It's not that easy to find workers. Medium salary in Italy is not growing up from a long time. And this is very sad because many times young university students prefer to not work instead of working just because of this.
It means they employ migrant workers to fill the gap. And there's no shortage there, with new arrivals soaring by 50% last year, despite the government promising to crack down. So at the Centre for Young Unaccompanied Migrants, more keep coming, and the town is feeling the strain.
It's okay for now, the numbers that we are receiving now. But I don't know in the future if they could increase more, if it would be okay. It would be a little difficult.
You're at your maximum point, do you think?
Maybe, yes, I think so.
They put together pieces of broken lives in a country they'll now call home. Inusa paid smugglers €2,000 to get here from Burkina Faso.
Lots of Africans think Europe is a paradise, but it's not true. Now I tell people back home to stay there, but I know they will keep trying. And even if Italy wants to stop the boats, it's impossible.
So the to-do list is long for Giorgia Meloni, elected Prime Minister 18 months ago and still leading the polls. The main city here, Latina, mirrors Italy, with the same issues and the first woman in charge.
The Meloni government is working well. We have problems of a falling birth rate, for example, which affects all of Europe. We used to passively accept migrants, but now we have a big say in managing flows. It's important that our party wins this election so we can put forward our ideas at a European level.
Behind Italy's blustery beauty lie its age-old problems. But what has changed here in the past 18 months is who's trying to solve them, with Giorgia Meloni dominating Italian politics and hoping to further entrench her position after these European elections. But well beyond these shores, Europe's other right-wing leaders are also looking at her as a sort of figurehead, an example of what they too will hope to achieve.
And so a key moment for Italy and for Europe. A vote on how to navigate these rough times. Mark Lowen, BBC News in Latina.
Pleased to say that Mark is with us tonight, although he's in Lisbon. He does get about. We couldn't talk Italy without Natalie Tocci, Director for the Institute of International Affairs, who is in Rome. Also in Rome, Fabrizio Pagani, back on the programme, Senior Advisor at Vitali and former Chief of Staff for the Italian Finance Minister. You're all very welcome to the programme. Mark, let me start with you, because it's interesting that Giorgia Meloni has put a lot of focus on these elections. In fact, she plans to run herself as a candidate in all 5 of the country's European constituencies. And her party looks well set to win the vote. So the question is, what is she trying to do? What does she want to do in Europe?
She wants to ensure that the right wing is in charge in the key institutions, the European Commission, that they have a dominant say in the European Parliament, that there are a significant number of MPs from her grouping, which obviously encompasses a lot of different countries. That's how European politics work. Countries' MEPs belong to larger groupings. So she wants to ensure that that her country and the political ideals that her party espouses are brought forward in the European Parliament. I should just say, just explain that thing that you mentioned there, Christian, because she is running, but that is quite an Italian thing. That Silvio Berlusconi did it as well. Matteo Renzi, another former prime minister, they run as candidates for the European election, in effect to try to give a bit of name recognition to try to encourage Italians to actually vote in the European elections. But then they don't take up their seats because, of course, the Italian prime minister would not relinquish his or her position to become an MEP. So Meloni is running for her party. It's a sort of a bit of a tactic, if you like, and she'll be elected. Of course, she's top of the list, and then she would relinquish that and give it to one of her deputies, to become an MEP.
Yeah, what interests me, Natalie, about this is that she probably on migration stands pretty close to the likes of Marine Le Pen, but Marine Le Pen sits in another group. This is the Identity and Democracy group within the European Parliament, and she doesn't want to belong to that. She sees herself in slightly different terms. Why?
Well, firstly, she is the leader of her own group. So Meloni is the leader of the ECR group, so the group of European conservatives. I would say that in terms of sort of political ideology, you could say that today ID is probably further to the right than the ECR. But frankly speaking, the way in which the evolution of these two groups took place doesn't really have to do much with political ideology. It really has to do at times with the sympathies and antipathies between some of these parties. And indeed, it has to be said that there isn't a great relationship at the moment. Let's see what happens in future between Marine Le Pen and Giorgia Meloni. This is also because, of course, in Marine Le Pen's group, so in the ID group, there is the other Italian hard-right party, Matteo Salvini's League, that in this competition within the right, in which Meloni has, because of her role as prime minister, she has had to, I wouldn't say moderate, but at least, try and portray herself as more of an institutional figure. She's basically been receiving, the competition from the right by Matteo Salvini that is in cohorts with Marine Le Pen in the ID group.
Right. Fabrizio, I was looking at the ageing population problem in Italy, and it is quite stark. So 50 years ago, there was one person over 65 for every child aged 6 or under. And now the ratio is 5 to 1. So Italy needs migration. It seems that they don't want the kind of migration that they have.
I would make a distinction between, irregular migration and those who are coming into the country with a work permit. And in that sense, I think the policy of this government have been quite different, because of course the rhetoric and all the public discourse has been very harsh against irregular migration. But in terms of regular migration and opening up to the regular flows, this government has been quite generous, definitely more generous than previous governments. There are around 500,000 people which will be let into the country in the next 3 years, which is definitely much more than it was with previous government, including left-wing governments.
Yeah, that's quite familiar, isn't it, Mark? Because actually we have a problem with net migration in this country, well above where the Conservatives would like it to be. Not well publicised, they don't talk about it. It's almost as if illegal migration is the cover for what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, look, Giorgia Meloni, when she was running to become Prime Minister before the elections in October 2022, she was advocating a naval blockade of Libya. She was taking a much harder line on migration than she has in office. I mean, she is still quite quite hard on this issue, and she has, for example, struck a deal with Albania that Italy will build a migrant reception centre, or a couple of migrant reception centres in Albania, to take asylum seekers who are trying to get to Italy, and then they will be processed in Albania under Italian law, and if they get asylum, they'll be able to come to Italy. Now that is, it's drawn the ire of human rights groups, but actually, interestingly, she was backed by figures like Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, on this as a sort of novel approach to migration. I mean, look, Giorgia Meloni, Natalie alluded to it earlier. Giorgia Meloni has moderated in office, as we all expected she would. Her party, she started off politics in the post-fascist youth movement after the decades after the Second World War, which was allowed to kind of rebuild the fascist party. But she is now, even though we kind of used to call her far right, I think actually, to some extent, there are parts of the US Republican Party, there are parts of the British Conservative Party that are much further to the right than her. And as Natalie alluded to, Matteo Salvini's party is harder to the right. So I think she rejects the label far right, and she would call herself a right-wing, national conservative party. And I think that is more the kind of politics that we're getting from her in office.
Yeah, Fabrizio, I talked about a realignment, and there certainly has been a realignment, to the extent that Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, when questioned last week about this, said she would work with some of these hard right groups. I guess that's political pragmatism, because the winds are blowing in that direction, aren't they?
Well, I think we will see with the elections in 3 weeks. The European Parliament has always been dominated by two groups. The Christian Democrats, the Popular Party, and the Social Democrats, the Socialists. This time, perhaps, is different. Although it's not easy to change that dynamic, which is really long-standing in the practice of the European Parliament. But perhaps, the new Commission will have the vote also of the ECR, the Conservative Party to which Fratelli d'Italia and Giorgia Meloni belongs to. Yeah. We will see. I think there may be some change indeed in the majority which supported the European Commission coalition.
Natalie, I'm really struck. We're only into our fourth country, but we're not questioning whether the hard right will finish at the polls. We're already talking about what the European Parliament will look like when they win in some of these countries. What are the dangers for the European Union and for the European electorate of the Parliament having quite a sizable hard right presence?
Well, firstly, let me say that, I think that Italy's contribution to this far right tilt is actually minimal, if non-existent, and I explain what I mean. We're obviously comparing to the existing European Parliament elected back in 2019. In that European Parliament election, the League, which, as we said, is actually even further to the right of Giorgia Meloni, actually won, my memory serves me right, 34%, 35%. Meloni's going to be very lucky if she gets close to 30. So basically what we've seen as far as Italy's contribution to this right-wing tilt is a reorganization, of votes within the right. So I think, one has to, one has to sort of moderate what is it that Italy's impact on all this would be. In terms of what the policy implications are, in a sense, we've already begun seeing this. Yeah, we've already started seeing how Ursula von der Leyen trying to sort of woo votes for the right has been essentially spending more time in Rome almost than in Brussels, right? She's been going together with Meloni to Tunisia, to Egypt, signing these, frankly speaking, very dubious deals with some of these North African countries. There are a number of countries actually this week, Denmark, the Czech Republic, that actually wrote a letter expressing interest in the kind of deal that Italy signed with Albania. So you see the way in which it's having already now, before the European Parliament elections, an impact on something like migration.
That's really interesting.
And of course, we've already started seeing the sort of, rowing back on climate policy. And all this is happening before the elections.
Yeah, we're going to come to climate policy, but it's really interesting because the Conservative government said just the other week that once they got Rwanda plan through, that other European countries would start looking at it, and indeed that is seemingly the case. We're hearing other countries now starting to talk about third countries. Listen, we'll take a break. Coming up, we're going to take a look at some of the other big issues facing Italy. We all remember the debt crisis of 2008, and the risks are still there. Has Giorgia Meloni postponed the financial pain for electoral gain? So, as discussed, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni intends to use her personal popularity next month to boost her party's chances in this European vote. And if the polls are right, then the post-fascist Brothers of Italy will take 27% of the vote. As Mark was saying, back in 2009, the late Silvio Berlusconi did something similar, running as his party's lead candidate in the EU elections and then staying on as head of the Italian government. And also Matteo Renzi did the same thing 5 years later. So this is not a new tactic, but it does reflect how much importance the Italians attach to this vote and to the debate that is forming in Europe around deficits, spending, migration and climate. Our reporter Sofia Bettiza explains.
For Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, the European elections in June will be a key test of her strength. So what's her strategy? Well, to understand what she's thinking, let's have a look at this speech from the 28th of April, when she announced she was running and outlined her vision for Europe.
We want to create a majority that brings together centre-right forces and send the left into opposition in the EU. It is difficult, but it's possible.
Her goal is to hold the key to creating a grand centre-right coalition between the ECR, which is the political group that she belongs to, and the European People's Party, the largest group in Brussels. So essentially bringing together centre-right forces in the European Parliament. Now, her decision to personally run is unusual in the EU. Apart from the Croatian Prime Minister, no other European leader is a candidate in the European elections. And analysts say that this is all part of a strategy. She wants to capitalise on her popularity to maximise support for her party at a European level. So what would that mean for the EU? Well, Giorgia Meloni is already an inspiration to the European far right. It was pressure from Meloni that compelled Brussels to scale back its climate package. And it was also because of Meloni that Europe changed the way that it deals with migration. Now, most Italians will remember that not so long ago, her party used to call for Italy to leave the Eurozone. Giorgia Meloni said things like the euro is a flawed currency destined to implode. But now, rather than disrupt the EU, Giorgia Meloni seems keen to run it and to put her stamp on it. And this is unusual. It's rare that an Italian Prime Minister is playing such a key role in Europe. Normally, it's leaders from Germany, France, and until recently, the UK that held the most power. But next month, Giorgia Meloni's influence in Brussels, together with other far-right populist parties, seems only set to get bigger.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? These parties that were committed to leaving the European Union, they no longer want to get off the bus. They want to drive it. Maybe that's the lesson of Brexit. I don't know. But Fabrizio, I do want to focus on some of this domestic policy because I think it informs what Meloni might want to do in the next Parliament, particularly when it comes to tax and to spending. I mean, she's postponed the spending reforms until 2026, which could store up some trouble, couldn't it? Because if you look at the budget deficit, it's just over 7% of GDP. That's well above the European target.
Absolutely, although there are some one-off which you know will not be recurrent in the next years. However, I think crunch time has not yet come for this government in terms of fiscal policy. It will be in the next year budget law, which will show the real colors of the government in that sense. For a number of reasons, starting with the fact that the new fiscal rules at the European level will enter into force and will need to be respected.
Yeah,
Italy will have an adjustment. We'll have an adjustment which will be, according to different calculation around 0.6, 0.7 of GDP per year, which is equals to 14 billion per year, which is doable but challenging.
Natalie, the interest rates are still high, so it's expensive to borrow at the moment. I was just looking at the 10-year bonds. It's the yield is lower than it was, so they're out of the danger zone, which I think they were in last year, but still very vulnerable to external shocks. And the European Union is going to play tough on this. So what does Meloni hope to get from the Commission when it comes to spending targets?
Well, this is the thing, and I think it connects to this broader conversation that we're having. Yeah. So far we have seen a Meloni that, for various reasons that have to do with the fact that there is Joe Biden in the White House, that Italy has been receiving a lot of money from the European Union through Next Generation EU. The fact that the budget rules up until the end of last year had been, essentially they had been suspended. And now that we've seen that there is this still window in which, the spending can continue. However, these and so all of these circumstances have meant that Meloni up until now has been, in a sense, behaving relatively well, right? And of course, as we were saying, the ambition is to try and change the EU from within on a number of issues that we've discussed, the migration, climate, and so on. However, what happens if those circumstances change? Because at some point, as Fabrizio was saying, push will come to shove when it comes to the economy. At some point, the fact that these irregular migration numbers will continue going up, at some point she will have to be held accountable for this vis-a-vis her own electorate. What happens if Trump were to return to the White House? And so you can be a good transatlantic and yet be deeply and show that you are deeply Eurosceptic, right? Much like Trump himself is. So I'm not necessarily arguing that she will lower her mask and, in a sense, return to her true self. But I think it is a likelihood. So I wouldn't at all be certain that the moderation that we've seen over the last year and a half is set to stay in the years to come.
Mark, does that sort of tie back to what we've been discussing with regards to the workforce? Because when you look at wages, there's no set minimum wage in Italy, and when you look at average wages vis-a-vis other European wages, they're a lot lower. And I wonder if that's part of the problem in Italy, that that there's a brain drain, that younger people, talented younger people, go looking for higher wages outside Italy.
It's a huge problem, and there is an estimated 500,000 Italians who have left the country since the debt crisis in 2011. But interestingly, Italy also has the second lowest number of
25, I think it is, to 64-year-olds in the EU with a university degree, just ahead of Romania. So, you have talented Italians leaving the country, but also Italians not finishing their degree and not wanting to join the workforce often because the salary is so low. So there are these chronic problems. But then added to that, you have things like, for example, the massive demographic decline that the population has dropped below 59 million. It's the lowest number of births now since unification of Italy in 1861. So it's well below the numbers needed to replenish the population. So these are real problems that are chronic problems that are facing Italy. One point I just want to add, Christian, to what we're saying, which is that I think Meloni is a very interesting character because, yes, we talk about her post-fascist roots and her hard right background, but she's also kind of the only leader in the European Union that I can think of who can sit on the table and sort of have one hand towards like Emmanuel Macron, for example, and Olaf Scholz, and another hand towards Viktor Orban in Hungary because of that sort of right-wing or those hard right roots. So she's needed actually by Western European governments as that kind of go-between, and also critically, she's been very, very pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia in the Ukraine war. So that's why she's also needed and respected by people like Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak. So she's really, there has been a real place for her, I think, that she has kind of a niche in a sense that she's filled in the European Union, and she's absolutely playing to that.
Listen, it's been a really interesting discussion. We've not even got to climate change, which is such a big issue, but we're going to talk about it next week because we're off to Germany. Just enough time to say thank you to Mark, thank you to Natalie, thank you to Fabrizio for your contributions this evening. In 2021, of course, in Germany, the Green Party entered the government with the best election showing of its history. But now it seems momentum has well and truly stalled. So we'll take a look at why. That's coming up next week. Hope you'll join us for that. Good night.
Hello there. Despite some cloud across northern areas, especially across Scotland, much of the country had a pretty decent day today with a good deal of sunshine around. It felt quite warm through the afternoon. That's how we're keeping things for the rest of this week. Always a bit more cloud across this northwest corner with some rain at times, particularly the north and west of Scotland. By far the bulk of the dry, sunny weather will be across England and Wales. There may be the odd isolated shower here and there, but most places will stay dry. In fact, a pretty good looking week coming up all in all, thanks to high pressure, which has been building in, killing off the showers, pushing away the weather fronts. It's left a legacy of cloud, though, and that's what we're going to see again across parts of the north of the UK, and also some sea fog, some mist and murk here and there across the North Sea coast in towards the Irish Sea as well, but generally dry for most with a few clear spells, temperatures 6 to 10 Celsius. High pressure then dominates the scene, gets a bit stronger across the country, so I think we'll see fewer showers for England and Wales, but these weather fronts will bring thicker cloud, more of a breeze, outbreaks of rain to the northwest of the country. Most places starting dry, a bit of mist and murk to start off with, plenty of sunshine, England and Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, Northern Ireland, then we'll start to see splashes of rain with increasing breeze across the north and west of Scotland into the afternoon. So 13, 14 degrees here, up to 20 for southern Scotland, 21 or 22 in the warmest spots in England and Wales. The winds generally light coming in from the south. Wednesday night, most places dry again with clear spells, variable cloud. Stays quite cloudy, breezy with outbreaks of rain across the northern half of Scotland through the night. And temperatures again 6 to around 10 degrees. So for Thursday then, I think we'll see more sunshine around across England and Wales. Bit of a cloudy start, then the sunshine really gets going, and I don't think there'll be any issues with showers whatsoever. Should stay completely dry. Bit more cloud for northern Scotland, the odd shower here, but southern Scotland, Northern Ireland doing pretty well. Temperatures 19 or 20 degrees here, 22 or 23 the warmest spots across England and Wales. High pressure continues to bring fine weather on Friday and into the weekend as well, but it starts to retreat towards the continent and allows low pressure to take over initially from the west as we head through the latter part of Sunday. So it could be quite warm Friday and certainly into the weekend across the south of the country. By the end of Sunday, we'll start to see a few showers, I think, pushing into western areas. Take care.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraiser. You're watching The Context on BBC News.
They have no case. Every single legal scholar that I see, I mean, maybe there's somebody out there, some whack job, but for virtually everyone that I've seen has said there's absolutely no case. It's a case that shouldn't have been brought.
The woman who Donald Trump paid $130,000 to keep quiet has been speaking out in great detail in court.
She says that she decided to do that not because of the money, but she thought it was a win-win. She could get paid and also secure the safety of her family with just getting the story out.
Joining me tonight on the panel, the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and Julio Ricardo Varela, president of Furore Media. We'll get to our panel very shortly. First, let me bring you the latest BBC News. Stormy Daniels, the adult film star at the centre of Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York, is giving testimony about their alleged sexual encounter in 2006. The prosecution argue that since she was paid right before the 2016 election, that constituted a campaign finance crime. Donald Trump says there's no case. The intelligence service in Ukraine say they have uncovered a Russian plot to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky. 2 colonels from the government's protection units suspected of passing on secret information to the Russian FSB have been arrested. The White House says it is still hopeful Israel and Hamas can close the remaining gaps on a ceasefire agreement the Palestinians have accepted but Israel has rejected. The talks have begun again in Cairo while the fighting in Gaza continues. The Israelis have cut off the main crossing point in Rafah. Now, rescuers in South Africa have made contact with some of the construction workers trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building. 5 people have died and dozens are missing. The building itself was a 5-storey apartment building with the floors collapsed on top of each other. Stormy Daniels told the jury in Manhattan today that when she first met Donald Trump, he told her, "This is the only way you're getting out of the trailer park," before having sex with her in his hotel suite in 2006. He denies ever having sex with Daniels, but the adult film star was paid $130,000 for her silence just before the 2016 election. Daniels told the court she grew up as the daughter of a single mum who was absent for days at a time and began working in strip clubs and in pornography before she met Trump at a golf tournament. The former president paid her, she says, for her silence through his advisor Michael Cohen. The prosecution alleged that Trump falsified business records to cover up the money he reimbursed, and he did it to keep the electorate in the dark. That, says the prosecution, was the crime. A campaign finance violation, a felony to which Mr. Cohen has already pleaded guilty. The former president says he did nothing wrong.
They have no case. Every single legal scholar that I see, I mean, maybe there's somebody out there, some whack job, but for virtually everyone that I've seen has said there's absolutely no case. It's a case that shouldn't have been brought.
Julio, we've heard a lot today about President Trump's affair with Stormy Daniels, everything from the way it happened to his silk pyjamas. Do you think that sort of salacious detail cuts through to the voting public?
Oh, I don't know anymore. What I do know is that this is once again the obsession with Trump that we're having in media, in the sense that it's just free for him, right? And I think we've come to the point that if he is convicted of this, if he does go to jail, and there's talk that he might even go to jail for contempt, that this will even make his campaign, would almost like re-energize his campaign. And it just feels weird that we're back in 2016 again, when I feel like we've never gotten out of this haze in the first place. So I had to check my clock today, Christian, in terms of like, what year am I living in? But wow, it's pretty obvious